Hey, this is Doug Field, and welcome back to Healthcare Consumerism Radio, joined by my co-host Brent Macy. And we've got interesting discussion taking place. We just talked about gamification of social media and, how that's improving companies during open enrollment. And I think we turn to an interesting discussion now about HSAs and, some survey results about, where HSAs are. And joining us to talk about that is Eric Remjeske and John Robb with Devenir out of Minneapolis. Welcome to you both.
Great, thank you. This is Eric Remjeske with Devenir.
Yeah.
With me today, as was mentioned, I have John Robb with Devenir. And we have, as was mentioned, conducted our 6th semi-annual HSA survey and research report. We conduct this survey twice a year, as was mentioned. Year-end and mid-year are the two timeframes that we conduct the survey. We found most recently in our survey that there are a little over 9 million HSAs out there in the country, by our estimates, and representing about $18.1 billion in assets. I'll leave it to John Robb here now to talk a little bit about what the methodology was in our survey and the resulting report.
Hey, John.
Sure. As Eric mentioned, we just wrapped up our 6th semi-annual survey, and we conducted it here in July with the end point in terms of data collection being on June 30th. So mid-year data points here. And we had, participation amongst all different types of HSA providers, from small community banks and credit unions all the way up to the largest HSA providers out there. However, the bulk of the participation was amongst about the top 50 HSA providers out there.
Okay. So some of the results, from the kind of taking a step back to the beginning of HSAs, what kind of growth have you seen based on this study from when HSAs were first introduced in 2003?
So it's a great question, and so HSAs were introduced in the Medicare Act of 2003, which allowed for HSAs as of January 1st of 2004. Early on, there's not a lot of data available on the growth in 04 and to some degree 05 as well. We started to conduct research in that 05, 06 time frame and followed a number of other research-provided data and decided a number of years ago that the data just wasn't very helpful. It was pretty spotty. So we decided that it was time to start using the data that we had and start conducting the survey. The growth over time in accounts and assets has averaged over time around 30%. We've had a couple of years where we were in that 40% range, and we've had a couple of years where we were in the mid-20-something% as far as growth. One of the interesting time frames was in 2010 when we passed healthcare reform. So in 2009, early 2010, we saw a little bit less growth, typically because of sort of a wait-and-see mentality. John, any additional comments on growth and on that period of time?
Not necessarily in that particular time. I mean, I would just, add that, even as these accounts, and, here we are at $18 billion in these HSA accounts, even with the law of kind of large numbers, we're still seeing fantastic growth, and especially with large employers really pushing adoption, they're really still helping to push that needle in terms of year-over-year growth for HSA assets.
John and Eric, this is Doug. I talk to a lot of employers and HSA providers on a weekly basis, and I get the feeling that this fall is going to be a very revealing fall time period as far as full replacement HSA high deductible plan adoption by that larger mid to large employers. Is the survey telling some of those same facts? Do you guys have that same feeling? Let me just talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, that's a great question. And one of the things that we've seen in our survey, and one of the things that we've seen in the AHIP data that comes out every year around June, AHIP does covered lives, so they're basically trying to identify how many covered lives are there in an HSA qualified high deductible health plan. Our survey is conducted and done to identify how many HSA accounts there are, and keep in mind that roughly 50%, it's about 53% are family and 47% are individuals. So it's a different number with a different underlying metric to it. Overall, what's interesting, though, is on the full replacement side of things, we're seeing that large employers in the AHIP study and in our study are really the breadth of the growth today. So large employers are reviewing their health care as far as we can tell, and they are choosing to not get rid of their health insurance, but they are choosing to adapt to either a paired HSA plan, or in many cases, as was just mentioned, and what we're seeing in a number of the studies, we're at about 25% going into this next year of the large employers, those being the S&P 500 type companies, adopting to a full replacement type strategy. In other words, it's no longer a PPO and HSA option. It's all HSA, and it's just a matter of what type of deductible is out there.
What do you see? There's a lot of disruption taking place in the market around private and public exchanges, and in the corporate environment, specifically around look and see, some adoption to defined contribution exchanges. A lot of surveys are being done talking about how 2015 could be an explosion year. What do you see happening, and specifically, what do you see happening around private and public exchanges and the impact that will have on the HSA product?
Great question. And overall, 2014 is kind of an interesting year for the exchanges, both private and public. I think the relationship that we'll put is almost a first generation of a vehicle or of almost any product is a little clumsy and has its defects. Our sense is that 2014 is going to be that first generation, same experience. It's going to be clumsy pricing, it's going to be clumsy communication, and adoption is going to be spotty because people are really just trying to figure out, what the exchanges are all about. The interesting part for us, and that's kind of less in the media, is that we think the private exchanges are really where a lot of the interesting action in high-deductible, consumer-driven healthcare related to HSAs and really HRAs is where the action is going to be. Private exchanges are where many employers are going to collectively put together their interests and give a number of options collectively with themselves and other employers. But public exchanges are where I think the clumsiness is really going to be, simply because public exchanges, it's so politicized, and again, the communication is one of the biggest challenges. So public exchanges will be likely where 2015 you'll start to see a little bit more of a marketplace, a little bit more streamlined effort, a little better communication, a little bit more, we'll call it reasonable pricing.
Mm-hmm. Do you see in the public exchange, Eric and John, HSAs, succeeding, with subsidies involved, et cetera?
It's another good question. From our standpoint, as far as we can tell, the actuarial value, which is the IRS calculation to see whether or not an HSA will qualify for bronze, silver, et cetera, effectively actuarial value will help HSAs qualify for those metal levels in just about every exchange that will offer an HSA. From the few states that have provided information on their health plans that will be in their public exchange, we found that only a handful are actually offering HSAs, and there are a few that appear to not be offering HSAs, whether intended or unintended. California is an example where it appears as though there is not an HSA option, again, whether intended or unintended. So as a result, again, much like I think 2014 will be clumsy, I think HSAs will have kind of a clumsy introduction into the public exchanges in 2014 for sure, and then 2015, I guess, will be, to be determined.
Eric and John, this is Brent. Was there anything, going back to your survey, was there anything that came out of the survey that kind of surprised you, something that you didn't, you weren't looking for, but out of the survey came, some specific information on that kind of surprised you guys?
John, maybe you want to make a comment?
Yes, this is John here. I guess one thing, we've known for quite some time that there's a lot of money flowing in and out of these accounts. But I was, really just shocked that we saw a pretty large uptick in the amount of money flowing into these accounts. We saw almost, about over $16.7 billion flowing into these HSA accounts. There's another, $12.9 billion withdrawn from these accounts. So we saw a net of retained assets of about $3.8 billion. So I was, there's just tons and tons of money flowing into these accounts, and so it's increasing education and communication from HSA providers to the HSA account holders in terms of understanding the tax benefits of these accounts and the benefits of really maxing out the contributions. So we saw $16.7 billion contributed to these HSA accounts, but really that's just a small sliver. Probably about half of what could have been contributed had HSA account holders maxed out their contributions, yearly contributions.
So they HSAs are maturing to the fact that it's now time for the individuals, the account holders, to look at some asset allocation strategies around their HSAs.
So this is Eric again. My comment to that is that we're seeing a strong adoption into the investments, if you will, especially in a low interest rate environment. We believe, at least at mid-year, about 12% of HSA assets were in investments. That represents about $2 billion. So people are definitely choosing, especially the accounts that are the more mature accounts, ones that have been around for several years, they're choosing to allocate their dollars into some form of investment. What's interesting is a lot of folks think that those people are just putting everything into investments, and what's also interesting about that part is that even though the average person who's investing has about $10,500 in their account, they still choose to keep about almost $4,000 in the deposit side of their account. So they are taking a pretty conservative approach. In other words, they're keeping a decent chunk underneath their deductible in savings that's attached to a debit card. So if they do have a medical event or pharmacy needs, they have that available, and they're taking that excess amount and investing. And again, on average, that's about a little over $10,000. Those folks are their average balances.
Well, excellent. Eric and John, time flies when we're having fun. We've got about 30, 45 seconds for you guys to leave our audience with some clear takeaways. So please.
Yeah, I think that the takeaways for us are really three. One is that the HSA market is alive and well. It will participate in the exchanges in one form or another, as we discussed. HSAs are growing at about 30% a year, accounts and assets on average. Obviously, we'll have some changes over time. Large corporations are the late adopters here, but they're definitely the driving force in adoption right now. They're putting a good amount of money that they're saving in premiums into HSAs for their employees, and it's changing the face of healthcare. And studies have shown that consumer-driven health plans with an HSA are changing behavior as well. So I believe HSAs are here to stay, and if you're not on board now, you may want to get on board soon.
Eric, John, thank you so much. Great talking with you. And Eric, we'll see you out west at IHC Forum December 5th.
Look forward to it. Both Doug and Brent, have a great day.
Take care. And our audience, stay tuned for the next segment, Healthcare Consumerism Radio.